Welcome back to Tempo Storm's Wild Deck Introduction Series, featuring Anyfin Can Happen Paladin. Since the beginning of Wild, Paladin has had access to multiple viable archetypes due to the strength and diversity of its class cards, like Shielded Minibot and Muster for Battle. One archetype that has persisted in this time is Anyfin Can Happen Paladin, which has consistently stayed relevant in the Wild meta. This is due in part to EAuPLavjSAtfrAgA, who made a name for himself by championing the deck to rank 1 Legend more times than the average player hits Legend. Let's take a peek at how this deck is currently doing in the Kobolds and Catacombs meta. Anyfin Can Happen Paladin is a deck which ultimately relies on the insane burst damage you do with the 10 mana card Anyfin Can Happen. To set up this lethal, you need to be running specific Murlocs in order to control which ones come back. Specifically, the deck runs 2 Bluegill Warriors, 2 Murloc War Leaders, 1 Old Murk-Eye, and the occasional Finja the Flying Star. By playing these minions throughout the game, they will all eventually be removed by your opponent and go to the Murloc Resurrect pool. Once you get to 10 mana, you can play Anyfin and resummon the Murlocs which were killed all at once. This results in a wave of charging Murlocs which are buffed up by Murloc synergies. If you played the majority of your Murlocs at this point, you can get around 20 damage on your first Anyfin Can Happen, and potentially more than 45 damage on the second one. If you remember playing this deck before the last set rotation, you may know it as a control archetype which tried to stall the game out until they could pull off the combo. The old strategy relied on board clears and healing to progress their gameplay. While this was successful back in the day, the meta of Wild has evolved since then, and Paladin became one of the weaker control classes. That's why the most current version of the deck is actually a mid-range deck. Anyfin Paladin runs a good amount of the current aggro Paladin core like Shielded Minibot, Muster for Battle, Righteous Protector, and Rallying Blade. Additionally, Kobolds and Catacombs has turbocharged this deck with the Paladin card Call to Arms, which thins your deck while developing pressure with your high-powered 1/2 mana minions. Along with these high-quality Paladin cards, the deck runs a lot of cycling, which allows you to get your Murlocs out early, apply pressure, and finish off the game in a 10 mana burst. As seen by AWDragon's prowess in deck building, the archetype has been made in various ways, as Paladin has many strong synergies in Wild. The deck used to have synergies that revolved around Silverhand Recruits, Corpse Takers, and even pre-nerf Pirates. At the current moment, decks are experimenting with Spiteful Summoner, as the only spell that is absolutely needed in the mid-range deck is the 10 mana Anyfin Can Happen, giving the spell even more value. A good amount of the deck is set in stone, requiring you to run the 5 core Murlocs, 2 Anyfin Can Happens, and the aggro core. The most relevant tech card to the deck is Finja the Flying Star, which is extremely powerful against aggro, being able to swing early board states quickly in your favor. However, the card dilutes your Murloc pool and is a dud when playing Anyfin Can Happen, so the card is not beneficial in the matchups where you rely on an OTK burst from your resurrected Murlocs. Along with Finja, another good tech card against aggro is Consecration, which allows for the deck to maintain board control and even create massive board swings against aggressive matchups. When teching against control decks, draw cards are key, such as Solemn Vigil and Cult Master. There have also been times where Equality was run independently from Consecration, giving the deck a tool that allows your minions to slice through large taunts or to keep a board of giants in check while you have initiative. Additionally, there are some build-around cards that amplify your deck synergies, like the Curator and Master Oakheart. The Curator is often run in this deck as it guarantees 1 Murloc draw. Other versions of this deck emerged to give Curator more value, running beasts like Stampeding Kodo and Haunted Creeper along with Azure Drakes. Master Oakheart is another build-around card which can thin out your deck significantly, as well as putting Murlocs into play. Tar Creeper is typically run in decks that include Master Oakheart to increase the number of 1-attack minions in the deck. Lastly, you will see traditional tech cards being used in this deck. Based on the current post-nerf meta, you will find Anyfin Paladins running Spellbreakers to counter Warlock, or Eater of Secrets to counter Aggro Mage. The Anyfin Can Happen game plan is very similar to the deck's Aggro Paladin cousin. The deck attempts to pressure your opponent early on in the game, keep board control through the mid-game, and win off of an Anyfin Can Happen as soon as possible. Due to having to fit the Murlocs and Anyfin into the deck, it has less explosive starts compared to Aggro Paladin. However, the deck can persist through the later stages of the game and can win where an aggro paladin would have burned out. Most of the time, you'll win games against other aggro decks by outpacing them using the aggro paladin shell. And against slower combo or control decks, you typically win from your Anyfin Can Happen combo. The deck is very versatile, but really relies on you knowing if you're the aggressor or defender in each game. You can win against aggro decks by stalling out their aggression, then playing Anyfin Can Happen, or you could burn out a control opponent purely with your aggro shell. One small tip to keep in the back of your mind while playing the deck is that your Anyfin Can Happen summons any Murloc that has died this game, even if it was played by your opponent. This is important to note because in the current meta, some aggro decks run Sir Finley Murgleton and some control decks are running Cold Light Oracle. If you aren't paying attention, you may get less damage out of an Anyfin Can Happen than expected because these non-combo Murlocs will pollute your Resurrect pool. Pure Murloc Paladin hard counters your OTK combo against this deck in a similar fashion by flooding the pool of Murlocs with cheap, non-combo Murlocs. This changes your combo-oriented game plan into a more board-centric matchup, where you run your opponent out of resources and play Anyfin as a 10-mana tempo play to establish board control. Another really interesting thing about this deck is the mirror matchup. With both of the players filling the Murloc Resurrect pool quickly, the game often comes down to whoever gets to play Anyfin Can Happen first. This leads to some interesting counterplay within the game. The player going second typically tries to save their coin to be able to Anyfin on turn 9, allowing them to play Anyfin first. This often leads to the first player being the aggressor in the matchup, trying to kill the second player before turn 9, and the second player playing defensively, trying to stall out until they can Anyfin. This matchup has been heavily discussed by players in the Wild community, where some say it's right to keep Anyfin in your opening mulligan as the second player to guarantee that you have it for turn 9. However, this can sometimes lead to a clunky opener, ultimately allowing for the first player to take control of the board early and put on enough pressure to end the game before the strategy comes to fruition. Anyfin Can Happen is a staple to the Wild format. A card that can OTK your opponent down with massive damage is hard to ignore in the Wild metagame. Since patch 10.2, this deck saw an uptick in play as aggro decks have lost a bit of their hold on the metagame. Overall, it's an enduring archetype that continues to climb the Wild ladder, and the post-patch meta is no exception. As always, please leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and join the discussion in the comments below. Let us know what you would like us to cover in our next deck introduction. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to stay up to speed with all of Tempo Storm's Hearthstone news and content.